We love clean stories, stories where hard work leads to success, where bad decisions lead to failure. We want the world to make sense, so we connect the dots in neat straight lines, but the truth is rarely that clean. The truth often lives in the fog between luck and risk. Two people can make the same decision with the same logic and get opposite results. One wins, one loses, not because one was smarter or one was foolish, but because the dice landed differently. That's how luck and risk work. They are siblings, they come from the same family. The only difference is whether they help you or hurt you. Take Bill Gates, a brilliant mind, no doubt, but he attended one of the only high schools in the world that had a computer at the time. If he'd gone to a different school, one without that access, there's a real chance the world wouldn't know his name. Was it his intelligence or the rare opportunity that shaped his future? It's both. And it's okay to admit that. You can appreciate someone's skill and still acknowledge the role of luck. Now think about the flip side, risk. Imagine a banker in 2006. He builds a portfolio, takes risks that are applauded, earns bonuses, wins awards. Everyone calls him a genius. Then 2008 comes. The same decisions that once looked smart now look reckless. Was he a different person? No, the world changed and risk showed up at the door. We are uncomfortable with this truth. We want to believe that success is earned and failure is deserved, but life isn't that tidy. There are people who worked just as hard as you, maybe harder, and failed. There are people who made worse decisions than you and still won. That doesn't mean we stop trying, it means we stay humble. We accept that our outcomes are not fully under our control, and when we win, we don't assume it's all because of us. When we lose, we don't assume it's all because we're broken. Luck and risk teach us empathy. If you're successful, look at others who aren't and understand. It's not always about effort. If you failed, don't believe the voice that says you're not enough. Maybe you were just standing in the wrong place when the storm came. This mindset also helps us plan better. If we accept that luck plays a role, we stop betting everything on one outcome, we leave room for error, we build margins, we protect the downside, because no matter how smart or prepared you are, the world has its own plans. And remember, people rarely share the whole story. You'll hear about the wins, not the survivorship bias. You'll see the highlights, not the hidden damage. Luck and risk are invisible forces. They don't show up in resumes. But they are always there, whispering in the background. So here's what we can do. Make decisions that give us the best odds, knowing they're still just odds. Respect the role of effort, but never ignore the role of randomness. Prepare like you're unlucky, act like you're lucky, stay kind, stay curious, and never assume the game is fair. Because in the end, the line between fortune and misfortune is thinner than we think. And often, the difference between the two isn't what we did, but when and where we did it. We often view life as a series of inputs and outputs. Work hard, get rewarded, make mistakes, face consequences. It's a comforting belief because it gives us a sense of control, but the truth is far less predictable, far less fair. Luck and risk are constantly shaping our outcomes, quietly influencing the results we see, whether we recognize it or not. Luck is what happens when things go better than expected for reasons beyond your control. Risk is what happens when things go worse, even when you did everything right. They're not opposites, they're two expressions of the same concept. Outcomes influenced by forces bigger than us. A person who invests in the stock market in 2009 and holds for 10 years may look like a genius. The same person who invests in 1999 and watches the next decade unfold looks foolish. Same strategy, different timing. The variable wasn't intelligence or skill, it was when they acted. That's luck, or perhaps that's risk, depending on which decade you're talking about. It's the same with career choices. Two people might take the same risks. Launching a business, leaving a job, starting over. One rides a wave of favorable economic conditions and market trends, and the business thrives. The other launches at the wrong time, during a downturn, and despite doing everything right, they fail. We tend to attribute too much of the outcome to the person and too little to the environment. That's human nature. We love to tell stories with heroes and villains, effort and laziness, brilliance and stupidity. But we struggle to tell stories that include the randomness of life, The job opportunity you only got because someone else declined it, the house you bought just before prices doubled, the injury that ended a career that was on track for greatness. These are real forces. They affect outcomes in profound ways, yet we don't talk about them enough because they make us uncomfortable. They remind us that we're not in full control. Luck and risk operate silently. You rarely see them at work in real time. They only become obvious in hindsight, and even then, we often explain them away. When something good happens, we say it's because we were smart, disciplined, focused. When something bad happens, we look for someone to blame, but many times the real cause is neither brilliance nor failure. It's the roll of the dice. It's the same in personal relationships, in health, in life trajectories. One person grows up in a supportive environment with access to education and role models. Another grows up surrounded by chaos. That gap, over time, shapes confidence, decision making, and outcomes in ways we can't fully measure. It's not to say people aren't responsible for their actions, but it is to say that not all actions begin on the same playing field. We see this in history again and again. Some of the most successful companies were born in moments of luck, getting funding just before a crash, landing a key client unexpectedly, being acquired by a firm that later exploded in value. It's tempting to build an entire narrative around their leadership, vision, and culture. But without that one lucky moment, would it have turned out the same? Maybe not. Similarly, we've watched brilliant minds destroyed by events beyond their control. Wars, recessions, political changes, health crises. You can do everything right and still fail. That's what makes risk so brutal. This idea isn't meant to make us cynical or fatalistic. It's meant to help us see the world as it truly is. If we acknowledge the role of luck and risk, we become more cautious in how we judge others and more humble in how we judge ourselves. We start to understand that not every poor outcome is due to laziness, and not every success is due to genius. This matters especially when we learn from others. We often seek advice from the most successful, assuming their path is worth copying. But if their success was shaped by circumstances that can't be repeated, we may be learning the wrong lessons. Survivorship bias creeps in. We only see those who made it, not those who used the same strategy and failed quietly. There's a balance to be found. We can celebrate hard work without pretending it guarantees success. We can acknowledge personal agency while respecting the role of probability. When we ignore luck and risk, we create unrealistic expectations. We tell people that failure is a sign of weakness, when sometimes it's just a reflection of timing. We tell them that success is entirely within reach, if only they want it badly enough. But effort and desire don't always overcome external forces. That's not an excuse, it's a reality. Think about sports. A game-winning shot hits the rim and bounces in. The crowd erupts. The player is a hero. If it had bounced out, the same player might be remembered for choking. One bounce, different legacy. Was it skill? Of course, but the final outcome hinged on inches and chance. Now apply that thinking to every part of life. Business, relationships, investments, health. The margins are often that small. The variables often that unpredictable. And yet we continue to tell ourselves stories that ignore them. This is why understanding luck and risk is so important. It changes how we view the world. It changes how we respond to outcomes, both good and bad. It teaches us to plan for uncertainty, to leave room for error, and to avoid overconfidence. It reminds us that we don't have as much control as we'd like to think, and that's okay. Because once we stop trying to control the uncontrollable, we can focus on what actually matters, making thoughtful decisions, acting with integrity, and staying grounded, no matter which way the wind blows. Success stories often sound like this. Someone had a vision, worked tirelessly, overcame all odds, and eventually made it to the top. It's neat, it's inspiring, and it makes us believe that the outcome was entirely the result of deliberate effort. What gets left out is just how much of that journey was shaped by events outside that person's control. The truth is, opportunity, timing, and circumstance are the invisible scaffolding behind nearly every achievement. They don't negate hard work, but they shape the arena in which that work takes place. To pretend otherwise is to misunderstand how success actually works. We live in a world where effort is visible and randomness is not. You can see someone waking up early, grinding, pushing through obstacles. What you don't see are the doors that opened quietly, the introductions made at the perfect moment, the accident that never happened, the parent who encouraged rather than doubted, the boss who gave a second chance instead of walking away. These moments of luck often occur in the shadows, unnoticed and unmeasured, but they're real, they influence outcomes, and they're not distributed evenly. Think about two people starting businesses at the same time. One begins just as the economy starts booming, interest rates are low, and consumer demand is strong. The other starts during a recession, funding dries up, and customers are cautious. Both founders may be equally smart, equally driven, equally visionary. Yet their outcomes might be wildly different, not because of their skill, but because of the environment. And if you only looked at the results, you might wrongly conclude that one was significantly more capable than the other. Timing is everything, yet timing is something we don't control. You can be early and misunderstood, or late and irrelevant. You can be the right person in the wrong era, or the wrong person in the right place. What makes this so complicated is that effort still matters a lot. It's just not the whole story. The person who makes it to the top almost always works hard, but many people work hard and don't get there. We tend to treat success as proof that the person did everything right and failure as proof that they did something wrong. But the world doesn't operate like that. Take any historical figure who changed the world. Scientists, leaders, entrepreneurs. Dig into their biographies and you'll find a long list of favorable breaks. They met the right mentor. They avoided a fatal illness. They were born in a country that allowed for upward mobility. They stumbled across a key insight or idea at just the right moment. Remove even one of those pieces, and the story could have gone differently. That's not to say they didn't earn their place in history, but rather that the conditions of their lives were unusually aligned for their success. We also underestimate the role of access. Access to education, access to resources, access to networks. These are not equally available to everyone, and yet they have enormous influence over how far someone can go. A child born into a family with books, internet, and encouragement will develop differently from a child born into poverty, chaos, or neglect. Both children might have talent, but only one has the infrastructure to develop it early. Over time, the compounding advantage grows, and what looked like a small head start becomes a wide gap. We call it merit, but often it's the product of years of accumulated opportunity. Circumstance plays a similarly quiet yet powerful role. Where you're born, when you're born, who you meet, what random events push you forward or hold you back. These things matter. They don't show up on resumes or in LinkedIn bios, but they influence outcomes in ways we can't replicate. You might get a job because someone liked you. You might lose an investor because they were in a bad mood. You might discover your passion because someone handed you a book you weren't even looking for. None of these things are planned. All of them matter. When we deny the role of timing and luck in success, we do two things. First, we overcredit the winners, making them feel infallible, destined, untouchable. Second, we punish those who didn't win, assuming they must have failed in character or intelligence. That kind of thinking not only distorts reality, but also feeds toxic ideas, like the belief that poor people are lazy or that rich people are automatically wise. It builds arrogance at the top and shame at the bottom, when in truth, the space between them is full of variables no one fully controls. Understanding that success is never purely earned also changes how we pursue it. If you think hard work guarantees an outcome, then any setback becomes personal. You feel like a failure. But if you understand that success is part effort, part circumstance, you can approach your work with more balance. You can build systems that don't rely on perfect timing. You can create fallback plans. You can be ambitious without being delusional. You stop thinking in terms of all or nothing and start thinking in terms of probabilities and preparation. This mindset also breeds gratitude. When you understand that many things had to go right for you to be where you are, you become less judgmental and more empathetic. You realize that someone else might be doing their best in far harder conditions. You stop comparing outcomes as if everyone started at the same point on the same track. You become more generous, more collaborative, more grounded, because you know your path wasn't a straight line drawn by sheer willpower. It was a winding road shaped by many hands, some visible, some not. It also changes how we define fairness. Fairness isn't just about rules being equal. It's about recognizing the uneven playing field that people operate on. If we ignore timing and circumstance, we end up rewarding those who were lucky enough to start ahead while blaming those who didn't have that chance. If we acknowledge those forces, we can start building systems that compensate for them, that create more real opportunity, that give more people a fair shot at showing what they can do. The illusion that success is solely earned may feel empowering at first. It puts you in the driver's seat. But it also sets you up for deep disappointment when things don't work out. A healthier, more realistic view is that you can influence your odds, you can shape your habits, you can make smart decisions. But you can't control everything. And sometimes, just being born at the right time, in the right place, surrounded by the right people, is the biggest advantage of all. Failure has a way of attaching itself to identity. When something doesn't work out, especially after effort and planning, the immediate instinct is to assume it's your fault, that something was wrong with the idea, with your judgment, with your execution. And sometimes that's true, but just as often, failure is the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's not about you. It's about the environment, the timing, the factors no one could have foreseen or controlled. And when we fail to account for that, we distort our understanding of what went wrong. Imagine a person starting a restaurant. They do the research, find a good location, hire skilled staff, and offer great food. Everything is planned with care. Then a pandemic hits, lockdowns begin, foot traffic disappears, suppliers fall through. Despite all the right moves, the business struggles or even closes. Was that failure a result of poor judgment? Or was it simply a storm no one could have anticipated? This is how risk works. It punishes decisions that, under different circumstances, would have succeeded. It turns skill into silence and effort into disappointment, not because they lacked value, but because the conditions weren't right. The hardest part about this reality is that it's invisible. When failure happens, people rarely talk about timing. They don't analyze the broader forces at play. Instead, they focus on the person. They dissect their choices, point out the flaws, and use the outcome to justify the critique. But this is a flawed way to understand events. Two people can follow identical paths with different results purely because one was unlucky, the market changed, the rules shifted, someone else got there first. These things aren't always obvious, and they rarely make headlines, but they shape the difference between what we call success and what we call failure. There's a tendency to believe in full control. It's a comforting thought that you are entirely the captain of your fate, and to some extent it's true, but the map you're following has terrain you didn't draw. Storms come and go without warning. Sometimes you get smooth waters. Other times you hit waves no one could steer through. Failure in rough seas is not the same as failure on calm waters. Yet we often treat them the same. We don't account for the difference between bad decisions and bad timing, between poor strategy and plain bad luck. Think about someone who invests in a business idea that was ahead of its time. The product was solid, the need was real, but the customers weren't ready. Maybe the technology wasn't widespread yet, or the culture hadn't shifted. 10 years later, someone else launches a nearly identical idea, and it takes off. Timing was the only major difference, but the first person walks away feeling like a fool, while the second is hailed as a visionary. This happens all the time. We just don't like to talk about it because it undermines the myth that success and failure are purely merit-based. This misunderstanding affects how people see themselves. When someone experiences failure, they often internalize it. They start believing they're not cut out for the game. They retreat, play smaller, stop taking chances. But what if the failure had nothing to do with their ability? What if they were simply caught in a moment where external factors overpowered personal effort? Without this perspective, talented people walk away from their potential. They assume they're the problem, when really, they were just standing in the wrong place when the wind shifted. It also affects how we treat others. We judge too quickly. We assume poor outcomes reflect poor choices, but we don't see the full picture. We don't see the challenges they faced, the variables they couldn't control, the near misses that altered the course. And because of this, we often dismiss people who may be highly capable. We ignore the role that risk plays in outcomes, and in doing so, we close doors on people who could still do great things under better conditions. Talent isn't always visible in the results. It's often hidden beneath circumstances. Failure is often louder than luck. When something doesn't work, everyone hears about it. The loss is public. The mistakes are magnified. But luck tends to whisper: a near miss avoided, a deal that barely came through, a competitor that dropped out at the last minute. These moments don't show up in the story, but they change the trajectory just as much. So when we look at someone who failed, we need to ask not just what they did, but when they did it and what was happening around them. Context matters more than we usually admit. It's not about avoiding responsibility. It's about assigning responsibility realistically. You can learn from a failed effort, but you have to be careful what lessons you draw. If you assume all failure comes from your own flaws, you risk learning the wrong thing. You might overcorrect, you might play it too safe, or you might give up altogether. But if you understand that part of your failure came from risk, from factors beyond your foresight, you can focus on what you can control next time without carrying the weight of misplaced blame. This view also helps you see success more clearly. When you understand how much of failure can be shaped by timing, you start to realize that success can be shaped by the same. The person who got ahead may not be better than you. They may have just moved earlier or later, or landed at the right intersection of need and readiness. That understanding removes envy. It replaces jealousy with analysis. Instead of asking why not me, you start asking what were the conditions. That shift helps you grow. It keeps you focused on progress, not comparison. Over time, this mindset builds resilience. Because when you understand the role of risk, failure doesn't break you. It informs you. It becomes part of the process, not the end of it. You stop seeing setbacks as verdicts and start seeing them as data. You realize that falling short doesn't mean you're not capable. It means you're in a game where variables shift constantly. And if you can hold on to that idea, you can keep moving forward even when the path looks uncertain. You can take another shot, armed not with guarantees, but with better perspective. And sometimes that's all it takes. Understanding the roles of luck and risk isn't just about explaining success or failure, it's about changing how we relate to other people. When we grasp how much of life is influenced by forces beyond our control, we begin to approach others with more humility, more patience, and more empathy. We become slower to judge and quicker to understand. Because once you've experienced how unpredictable outcomes can be, it becomes difficult to look at someone else's situation and assume you know their story. You start to realize that success is not always a sign of superior choices, and failure is not always a result of poor ones. Humility in success begins with remembering the points where things could have gone differently. The phone call that came at the right moment, the person who took a chance on you, the accident that didn't happen, the competitor who dropped out, the law that changed just in time. These events, often invisible to the outside world, played a part in where you ended up. And they weren't things you caused. They were fortunate turns, lucky breaks, that could just as easily have gone another way. When you understand that, it becomes harder to walk around with a sense of personal superiority. It becomes easier to say, yes, I worked hard, but I also caught a few breaks, without it feeling like a threat to your self-worth. This humility changes how we talk about success. Instead of telling stories that paint us as lone heroes who beat the odds through sheer will, we start to acknowledge the support we had, the systems we benefited from, the randomness that tipped in our favor. This doesn't make the success any less meaningful. It just makes it more honest. It makes it more human, and that honesty makes our advice to others more useful. Because when you admit that some things went your way, you help others understand that they're not broken if things haven't gone their way yet. You leave room for nuance in a world that constantly searches for simple formulas. Empathy in failure is the mirror image of this humility. It's the understanding that when someone else is struggling, it's not always because they made bad decisions. It might be because they were born into harder circumstances, faced more obstacles, got caught in a downturn, or simply ran into bad timing. When you accept the role of risk in shaping outcomes, you stop seeing people as winners or losers and start seeing them as people. People navigating the same unpredictable world as you, with different tools, different luck, and different timing. That shift in perspective can change how you lead, how you parent, how you manage, how you build relationships. In a world that often idolizes self-made success and blames people for their failures, this mindset can feel radical. But it's necessary, because if we don't build empathy into our thinking, we end up creating systems that punish people twice, once for their bad luck and again for not overcoming it fast enough. We create workplaces where only the loudest or the most fortunate rise. We create schools that reward those with support at home and overlook those without it. We build a culture that values results over context and image over understanding, and that culture is fragile. It's blind to risk. It doesn't prepare people for reality. When we operate from a place of humility and empathy, we become better decision makers, not just for ourselves, but for others. We start thinking in terms of second chances. We invest in people who have stumbled but learned. We support policies that level the playing field. We recognize that not everyone starts in the same place or faces the same headwinds. And instead of writing people off based on a single outcome, we begin to look deeper. What was their environment? What were the pressures they faced? What helped them or held them back that we didn't see? This mindset also makes us more resilient. When you view outcomes as a mix of effort and external forces, you're less likely to become arrogant when things go well or devastated when they don't. You stay grounded. You don't over-identify with your results. You don't let praise make you complacent or let failure crush your spirit. You accept that some of the journey will be out of your hands, and you focus on what you can control. Your preparation, your values, your process, your response to what happens next. That's a deeper kind of strength, one that lasts longer than any single win or loss. Humility and empathy also improve how we handle disagreement. When you believe outcomes are entirely earned, it's easy to look down on people who think differently. But when you understand how much context shapes our views, you begin to listen more. You realize that someone with a different opinion may have lived through different experiences, different risks, different luck. They may be reacting to something real, even if it's not part of your reality. That doesn't mean every opinion is right, but it means every perspective has a story. And if you want to be wise, you need to understand those stories, not just argue against them. This kind of thinking doesn't come naturally. It takes effort. Our default is to protect our ego in success and to rationalize away other people's pain. But if we want to grow, we have to challenge that instinct. We have to remind ourselves regularly that we're not the only ones trying, not the only ones facing invisible battles, not the only ones affected by the world's randomness. And when we start to internalize that, our sense of superiority begins to soften and our compassion deepens. Even in day-to-day life, this mindset shows up in small but powerful ways. It's the difference between rolling your eyes at someone's mistake and asking what they were dealing with. It's the difference between taking all the credit and saying, "I got lucky too." It's the difference between walking past someone who's down and offering a moment of kindness. These things might not seem big, but they add up. They shape how we move through the world and how we affect the people around us. Understanding luck and risk doesn't mean minimizing effort or excusing poor decisions. It means acknowledging that life isn't always fair, outcomes aren't always logical, and people aren't always in full control. It means creating space for complexity in a world that too often demands black and white answers. It means realizing that behind every success is a story more complicated than we think, and behind every failure is a person who probably tried. When we hold on to that perspective, we become better not just at navigating our own paths, but at walking alongside others on theirs. Most of life is uncertain. We make plans, set goals, and put effort into the things we care about, but we never really know how things will turn out. The future is filled with variables we can't see or predict. That's why the smartest approach to decision-making isn't to aim for perfection, but to give ourselves the best odds. We can't guarantee outcomes, but we can increase our chances. And just as importantly, we can protect ourselves from the worst-case scenarios. That's the key to surviving in a world governed by both luck and risk. Make decisions that are strong enough to handle bad luck and modest enough to not rely entirely on good luck. A common trap people fall into is overconfidence during good times. When everything's going well, it's easy to believe we're in control, that we've figured out the formula. We forget how much of that success might be circumstantial. We start taking bigger risks, thinking we've earned the right to play aggressively, but that's often when things become most fragile. The confidence that builds during a streak of good fortune can blind us to the reality that the world is unpredictable. When people lean too hard on the assumption that things will keep going their way, they set themselves up for a painful fall when the environment changes. The opposite of this isn't fear, it's humility. It's making choices that leave room for error, that acknowledge the unknowns, that plan for rainy days even when the sky is clear. It's not about being pessimistic, but about being realistic. Because if there's one constant in life, it's that something unexpected will eventually happen. It might be a financial downturn, a health scare, a business failure, or a personal loss. And when that moment comes, the people who built in buffers, who didn't bet everything on things going right, are the ones who stay standing. This philosophy applies to almost every part of life. In personal finance, it means saving more than you think you need, not just because you're disciplined, but because you accept that the future is unknowable. In business, it means avoiding decisions that only work under perfect conditions. It means running models that include worst-case scenarios, not because you expect them, but because you respect the possibility. In relationships, it means being generous and understanding, knowing that everyone is carrying their own hidden battles, and one bad day doesn't define a person. There's a phrase used in investing: you only have to get rich once. The idea is that once you've achieved something meaningful, financially or otherwise, your priority should be to protect it, not to double down and risk it all. But people often feel the pull to keep pushing, to chase more, to prove that they deserve their success. That mindset is where fragility begins. A fragile strategy is one that only works if everything goes right. A resilient strategy is one that still works even when things go wrong. And the difference between those two often comes down to how much room you left for luck to turn against you. Another common pitfall is the belief that success should look bold and dramatic. Big risks, big moves, big payoffs. But in reality, sustainable success often looks boring. It looks like discipline, patience, moderation. It looks like saying no to opportunities that feel exciting but come with too much downside. It looks like staying the course when others are chasing trends. The problem is that this kind of approach doesn't always get celebrated. People love stories of overnight success, of wild bets that paid off, but those stories are rare, and survivorship bias hides all the people who made the same bets and lost. What's more impressive than someone who took a giant leap and got lucky is someone who took 1,000 small steps and stayed in the game. Because staying in the game is everything. That's how compounding works. That's how experience builds. That's how you eventually catch the kind of break that changes everything. But you can only benefit from compounding if you don't blow yourself up before it has a chance to work. That's why survival should be the first goal in anything that matters. And survival is all about managing risk, not eliminating it, but containing it. This way of thinking also encourages a healthier relationship with ambition. Ambition is good, it pushes us forward, but when it's tied to unrealistic expectations or constant comparison, it becomes toxic. It leads people to overreach, to chase validation, to take on more than they can sustain. But when ambition is paired with humility, with the understanding that you're not owed anything and that luck plays a role, you end up with a more grounded form of drive. You aim high, but you don't pretend the path will be smooth. You hope for the best, but you prepare for the rough patches, and you don't attach your identity to the outcome. Being modest about your expectations doesn't mean you're thinking small. It means you're thinking long term. You're building in a way that lasts. You're avoiding the kind of fragile success that disappears at the first sign of trouble. You're focusing on systems over single wins, on consistency over excitement. That kind of thinking might not be glamorous, but it's powerful. Because over time, the person who survives the storms, not just the one who shines in the sunlight, is the one who builds something meaningful. This mindset also makes failure easier to deal with. When you understand that your plan was never built on guarantees, you don't take setbacks as personal insults. You see them as part of the process. You adjust, recalibrate, try again, and because you didn't stake everything on a single outcome, you still have options, you're still in the game, and being in the game is what gives you the chance to recover, to improve, to grow. People who stay in the game long enough eventually get opportunities that others never see, not because they were smarter, but because they were still there when the timing finally aligned. Risk management isn't about avoiding risk entirely. That's impossible. It's about understanding your exposure. It's about asking, if this doesn't work, what happens to me? And making sure the answer isn't catastrophic. It's about living below your means, leaving room for uncertainty, being skeptical of anything that promises too much too fast. It's about diversifying not just your investments, but your effort, your time, your attention. It's about creating options and reducing dependency on any single variable going right. That's how you build a life that can weather bad luck and capitalize on good luck without being destroyed by either. When you make decisions that are strong enough to survive bad luck and modest enough not to depend on good luck, you give yourself the best chance at long-term success. You don't get thrown off course every time the wind changes. You don't have to rebuild from scratch after every setback. You move forward slowly, steadily, and with clarity, and over time, those small, deliberate moves begin to add up. You're not just chasing outcomes, you're building durability. You're not just hoping for luck, you're preparing for life, and that preparation makes all the difference.